than simply keeping things that are useless, and that is keeping things that we have no business holding on to. There's a sign in my storage unit that basically tells us what you're not allowed to put in it. It's quite reasonable. Things like food, perishables, gasoline, other flammables, corrosive or toxic materials, and this is my favorite, creatures, living or dead. Not allowed in the storage unit. I think that's quite reasonable, right? And just as there are things that ought not to be stored in the storage unit, so there are things that that have no place in our lives. The Bible calls these things sin. Sin is basically a pattern of thought or an act that causes estrangement from God. It's living in a way that is contrary to how God would want you to live. Let's go back to the passage I read earlier, Romans 13, 8 to 12. Let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. For whosoever loves has fulfilled the law, and do this, understanding the present time. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Now the New Living Translation translates that bolded part of the verse, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness, by saying, so let us remove dark deeds like dirty clothing. Let us put aside. In other words, let's toss out, get rid of, throw away. I like your definition of Boxing Day. Put those things on the curb. So the question is, what are the things from this past year that you would like to or should put aside? What are your deeds of darkness? In what ways have you lived contrary to how you know God would want you to live? This list is going to be different for everyone here this morning, but rest assured, you do have a list. Because all of us fall short of God's standard, of God's glory. There are things that you have put in boxes in your soul that must be unpacked if you are to progress in your relationship with God and also with others. Remember Belinda, the Beanie Baby lover? Unfortunately, she could not bring herself to admit that her attachment to her Beanie Babies was causing a rift in her relationships with real people, with her own daughter. In the same way, we can jam stuff into these boxes and cram them away. Useless things, even dangerous things. So how do we know what boxes are filled with dirty clothing? With our deeds of darkness? How do we begin this process of unpacking and evaluating what's happened over the course of the past year? I'd like to suggest 4 practical things that we can do in order to get down to those brass tacks. The first thing is to ask. Ask God. Very simple. Matthew 7:7 says this. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Now there's a progression in this verse, right? The asking gets more emphatic. It gets more insistent. In other words, there's work involved. You have to be willing to cooperate with God in this journey. You must engage your God-given gifts of a mind and a will. Well, the second thing that we can do is to create space. It would be wonderful if God were just to reveal everything in your life in the past, in this past year, that needed to be changed in the flash of a moment. And maybe He's done that. I don't know, maybe you guys are popping with ideas. You're like, hey, I think He's talking about that in my life. But that's probably not the way it works. The verse before leads us through a process. Ask, seek, and knock. We have to be willing to create some space for this. To commit to taking time to pray, to asking, to thinking, to pondering. If your life is crazy, which, I'm sure a lot of your lives are crazy, then consider this. Consider asking someone you know, a spouse or a friend, to just give you a break from some of your responsibilities for a short period of time, a few hours, where you can actually slip out and put some effort into creating some space, into praying. The third thing to do is to repent. Make a 180-degree turn. Make things right with God. Ask God to forgive you for the things that you know to be wrong in your life, to give you ability to proceed into the new year with a fresh start, with a different outlook. And then the fourth thing is to proceed in faith. This is a difficult process. It's not an easy process. We have to trust that God will be with us in each step of this process, including the actual act of putting things aside, the hard work of throwing out useless and dangerous stuff in our lives. Before I say too much about this, I believe that Daryl is going to be, in his next sermon in the new year, going to be talking about looking forward. So I think he's going to be touching on some of these things, some of the key things that we can develop in our life that will help us in the new year. That's a little teaser. Come out next week for a continuation. Hopefully by that point, you will at least begin the process of asking and creating space. As I mentioned before this morning, everybody's got a small box. This is to help you to remember to actually follow through this week and do some of the things that are mentioned. So what things will you find in your unpacking that you can get rid of? What things will you uncover that can be thrown out, that can be put aside? I'd like to tell you about a king of Israel called Jehoiachin. Now, I'm sure all of you guys know his story already. Jehoiachin, right? But I'll just refresh your course real quick here. No, seriously, you probably have never heard of him before, and there's a reason for that. He came to power when he was 18, and his reign lasted 3 months. Jerusalem was attacked by King Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the Babylonian Empire. It was the powerhouse at that time, and he was taken into captivity. Yet, even in these 3 short months of ruling, the Bible tells us that Jehoiachin did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he was led into captivity as a payment, paying that price. But God did not forget him. And we read the following in 2 Kings 25, verses 27 to 29. In the 37th year of Jehoiachin's exile, in the year of Amwel-Marduk, he became king of Babylon. He released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. He did this on the 27th day of the 12th month. He spoke kindly to him, gave him a seat of honor, higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put aside his prison clothes, and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. After 37 years, Jehoiachin had the chance to get rid of his prison clothing, which represented the shedding of all the aspects of his life that were negative. He ate regularly with the king. God offered his salvation to a man who had done evil in his eyes. So my question is, how much more so will he offer salvation to those he loves, to those in whom his Spirit resides? Salvation from our prison clothes, from our dark deeds, and from our crudely stashed boxes in our souls. Belinda and Susan were invited by people that care for them to unbox, to put aside, and to throw out the things that were destroying their relationships with others. Fortunately, Susan was able to effectively sort out and recognize what she truly valued. Belinda, unfortunately, could not put aside the junk in her life, and it seemed to be costing her far more than she could comprehend.